Hello and welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm John Bachman, and joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Lanny Davis. He served as a special counsel to President Bill Clinton in 1996 through 1998. He also worked with President George W. Bush, and he's a Newsmax contributor. Mr. Davis, as always, it's great to have you back with us.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
All right, we want to talk about President Obama's new picks for his cabinet, starting with Chuck Hagel to replace Leon Panetta at the Defense Department. You just wrote that Hagel owes Jewish Americans and all Americans an explanation for his comments concerning Israel, in particular his comment on the quote-unquote Jewish lobby. Do you expect him to address this before he heads to the Senate for confirmation hearings?
Yes, I think he'll be asked, and he'll need to have an answer that not only, I think, indicates that the words Jewish lobby are inaccurate. There are lots of Jews and non-Jews who support Israel, but I think it's also offensive because it indicates a kind of generic categorization of Jews that really go back to the anti-Semitic years of dual loyalty that Jews were accused of. I think that Senator Hagel is an honorable man. I don't think he's bigoted. I think it was an insensitive expression, an uninformed expression, but he's got to address it. And in my view, not just among Jewish Americans, but non-Jews, I think he's got to explain that he didn't intend the connotation that that expression has.
And what is the best way for him to do that if he's going to do it before the hearings?
You know, I'm surprised he hasn't done it by now. He certainly apologized for what was an anti-gay remark concerning gays in the military, but he has not addressed this. I think he still makes the mistake that many others make, which is to converge the Jewish word with the Israel word. It's possible to be critical of Israel and to be critical of a lobby that lobbies in support of Israel without saying it's Jewish or a Jewish lobby. And I think he is mixing it up, that he can't be critical of Israeli policies in some respects. That's fair, while not attributing all Israeli, quote, lobbyists as Jews, which is a terribly offensive even to people such as myself. I've been in favor of a Palestinian state, independent Palestinian state, a two-state solution ever since I'm a kid, but I find Senator Hagel's insensitivity highly offensive, and why he doesn't address, I'm not unusual, I hear this all over among the Jewish community and non-Jews as well. I don't understand, but he certainly will have to in the public hearings that he's going to be exposed to.
Well, clearly President Obama knew this was going to come up. He knew this was going to be an issue here, and he's also faced a lot of criticism for his role and his opinions on Israel not being defending Israel enough. We're talking about President Obama here. What do you think this says about President Obama's plans for the Defense Department with this pick of Hagel?
Well, first of all, the president's entitled to pick any cabinet member that he chooses that reflects his views. He won the election. So that's pretty common. Ronald Reagan didn't pick people who didn't reflect his conservative views. And moreover, I have no doubt that Barack Obama is very supportive of Israel, and Senator Hagel's voting record was a record in support of Israel. His statements have been somewhat critical of Israel at times, and I don't have a problem with that. I do think that he has shown a lack of wisdom, in my opinion, on certain issues, on not supporting sanctions against Iran, on not condemning Hamas for terrorism. But those are positions that Senator Hagel took, not Secretary Hagel, who will follow the president's policy. So I'm okay with him being defense secretary. I'm not okay with his being insensitive and making a slur on the Jewish community that evokes dual loyalty canards that go back to the terrible years of anti-Semitism. I have no doubt that Senator Hagel is a patriotic and a man with character who isn't a bigot. But he's insensitive, perhaps because he's uninformed, and that's why I wrote the column that I did.
Yeah, his voting record certainly will come up in those hearings, and he's going to face some tough criticism, of course. We've already heard it publicly from Senators John McCain, Lindsey Graham, but we've also heard some very strong defenders of Chuck Hagel, including Colin Powell, and I had a conversation with General Michael Hayden, retired General Michael Hayden, former head of the CIA, supporting Chuck Hagel. Do you think that these early objections and these very vocal, loud objections coming from the likes of Senator McCain and Graham will be anything significant, or do you expect is this just part of the whole process?
It's part of the process. Look, Senator McCain, Senator Graham, every senator has a right to have doubts about a nominee of a president and to ask that nominee to explain. It's a very, very high bar. I think Senator McCain and Senator Graham would agree. Before you allow a president to choose the cabinet of his choice, I think that Senator Hagel will be confirmed with 70 or 80 votes in the United States Senate, but not before, on the record, he explains himself. And I hope they ask him, do you regret using the expression Jewish lobby rather than describing the pro-Israel lobby, which does exist? And do you really believe that sanctions shouldn't be applied in Iran? And do you really believe that Hezbollah and Hamas and the Revolutionary Guard are not terrorist organizations, defining terrorism as engaging in intentional murder of civilians for political purposes? He's got to answer those questions, but I still think, on the record, he'll probably correct his mistake on Jewish lobby. I hope so. But he, I believe, will be confirmed.
And there will be a lot of questions, too, what you just mentioned there. Let's also talk about John Brennan, Obama's pick to be the head of the CIA. We're hearing also from some of those same senators, including Senator Graham and Senator McCain, that they want to tie his nomination and try to force the White House to come clean on Benghazi. Do you think that's a strategy that's going to work?
Well, I don't know what coming clean means. Everybody, Senator Graham, Senator McCain, myself, who have written about this, are extremely upset about what happened in Benghazi in the absence of security and the death of 4 Americans. But it's real hard to get to the bottom of what the facts are in that very confusing situation. But to the extent that Mr. Brennan knows those facts, of course he should be asked and should explain. I believe that John Brennan is a great man, a qualified man to be the head of the CIA. I knew him very slightly during my Clinton White House years, and I support him strongly.
And let's also talk about Jack Lew, the president's choice to replace Tim Geithner as Treasury Secretary. Unlike Hagel and Brennan, Lew's critics haven't been quite as loud, but they are out there. Do you think Jack Lew is the right man for the job at Treasury?
Absolutely. Look, the Secretary of Treasury, from Alexander Hamilton, one of my favorite heroes in American history, all the way through Timothy Geithner, have a variety of skills. But for me, the most important one in this particular moment in American history is political knowledge of the budgetary process and an ability to get along with people. I've known Jack Lew for at least 20 years. He's got the worst signature, as President Obama pointed out, of anybody I've ever seen, maybe other than my father, who was a dentist. But he's just a truly nice guy and incredibly good on budget issues, maybe one of the great living experts on the federal budget, and most importantly, understands the political process, having worked in the White House, Chief of Staff recently, and he's very well qualified. Of course there are critics, of course there are people who need to voice that criticism, and the criticism is legitimate. Jack Lew is one of those kinds of people who will acknowledge his imperfections almost too quickly.
And those, you know, the critics are bringing up things like his implementation of deregulation during the Clinton administration, and he also worked at Citigroup at a time when the bank fell on hard times and needed government help, collected paycheck from them. Do you think that's going to be the biggest issue during the nomination process for Jack Lew, is his work at Citigroup?
Well, you ask good questions and very legitimate questions that need to be asked during his confirmation hearings, but when you use the word implement, that's really a good word to think about all the questions you've asked about all these people, and that is they're implementing other people's policies, namely the President of the United States. The President gets to choose the cabinet, and then he has to run for re-election. The President won re-election, so he gets to choose the cabinet again. But that doesn't mean that the Senate should automatically rubber stamp any nomination. They've got to make a public record and then use their own judgment as to what the standard is for voting no. The two people you mentioned, John McCain and Lindsey Graham, are two of the most outstanding people in the U.S. Senate, and I don't want to hurt their careers because I disagree with almost everything they believe in politically, because I'm a liberal Democrat. But they have a right, everybody does, to vote yes or no on a nominee. But I think they'll agree that the standard is really high, whether it's a Republican president or a Democrat, to vote no when the president won an election, has a right to name his own cabinet.
And you mentioned Lou's expertise when it comes to the federal budget. Previously, when he testified before the Senate on another issue, he admitted that he wasn't really an expert on all the intricate and complicated areas of the financial industry, including derivatives and other alternative investments. And these, to this day, those types of investment to this day remain some of the biggest concerns among bank regulators. Given that Lou has admitted that that's not really his area of expertise, do you still think that could cause? Do you think that might cause him a problem as the man of Treasury, kind of in charge of overseeing regulation on banks?
Well, first of all, he knows what he doesn't know and can bring in experts. I don't know anybody who can describe these derivatives very accurately. That was the whole problem, is they were so complicated and so far removed from where the collateral was, is that they were literally made up instruments not too different than placing bets in Las Vegas. In fact, some would say Las Vegas has a better chance of success than the bets that were placed by some of these so-called investment banker experts. But soon-to-be Secretary of the Treasury, Lou, recognizes the disease, the terrible circumstance of allowing these derivatives to almost bring down the American economy without any regulation or oversight. And I don't know how conservative Republicans still talk about too much regulation when they're still looking at least this derivative industry where nobody knew what was going on, even the people in the companies that were brought down. So I think Jack Lew is going to call in some experts if he needs some help when he needs it. But he's such a good big picture person and understands the Congress. And although I've heard some criticisms that he took tough stands on the fiscal cliff negotiations, if you know Jack Lew, he's really a sweetheart. I'm sorry to say that expression. As a human being, there couldn't be a nicer guy in this town, Republican or Democrat, than Jack Lew, and he'll do a very good job at Treasury politically, and that's what's called for now in these very difficult days ahead as we look at the debt ceiling issue as well as another fiscal cliff.
Since you mentioned he seems to know the dangers that these derivatives can cause, do you anticipate more regulation in that specific area of the financial industry with Jack Lew as head of Treasury?
Well, we now have an organization, despite Republican opposition, the Financial Control Board under the legislation that Elizabeth Warren was responsible in many ways for enacting. That should be the chief regulator over instruments that have the bet the farm risk that some of these, and let's tell your audience what a derivative means is it's a piece of paper that's given value because it's based on another piece of paper, which is based on another piece of paper. And about 4 pieces of paper down the line, there's a house that's worth some money. And it's worth a lot less than all the people were betting on who were buying and selling paper, similar to a Las Vegas gamble. So, of course, there needs to be more regulation if the result of the bet is, I don't mind the person who made the bet losing, but taxpayers get to pay the losses. That's not the right way of doing things. There needs to be much greater regulation. Jack Lew, as Secretary of Treasury, won't be really as much responsible as the agency under the Financial Control Board, or whatever it's called, the Regulatory Consumer Regulation Board for the financial industry that was established by law and which Elizabeth Warren had a lot to do with.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. Lanny Davis, it's been great talking with you. Thanks so much for your time, sir.
And thanks for interviewing me and allowing me to answer without interrupting, which is not what I'm used to when I do cable television at night.